recording.
Yes. Shall I start?
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us for this discussion this evening. If you are in India and wherever you are in any other part of the world, my name is Rahul Bajaj. I'm a senior resident fellow at the Vidhi Center for Legal Policy. And today we hope to discuss a really important topic that I think should matter to all of us. And we couldn't be having this conversation as in, the time is long past that we had this conversation, but I'm glad we're having it now. And the topic concerns digital accessibility of apps and websites for persons with disabilities. So I don't think it will come as a surprise to many of us that persons with disabilities in India face massive accessibility barriers in participating in the digital marketplace. You know, a series of apps and websites remain inaccessible to them, and the range of functions that all of us perform on an everyday that those of us who are able-bodied perform on an everyday basis become very difficult for them in light of these barriers, from watching television online to transferring money, from ordering groceries to getting food ordered for delivery, from dating or finding a romantic partner to engaging in online consultation with doctors. All these activities, people with disabilities remain shut out of by virtue of these barriers. And while technology has great potential to empower the disabled, if it is not designed to conform to certain accessibility standards and norms, it can actually reinforce and exacerbate the barriers that the disabled face in the physical world. So let me give you a few examples of what this means, because this is extremely critical for the conversation we're going to have. Like, what does it mean for something to be accessible to the disabled, and what is it that makes it inaccessible? So one example of technology not being accessible is the use of visual captchas. We're all familiar with captchas, which we have to enter to show that we are human beings and not robots. Now, if those captchas if it's a visual captcha where there's no functional audio, or where there isn't a text-based captcha or a recaptcha put in place, then that becomes inaccessible to those who are blind and also to those who are deaf-blind, because for them even audio captcha is not sufficient. They need it either in text form or recaptcha. Another example is, buttons on an app that are unlabeled. So button to pay, to go back, to send a message, to forward a message. If these are not labeled, then the screen reader, which is the software that the blind use to access the screen, which speaks out the text on the screen, it will just say button, and I will not know as a blind person what that button is for. Another example can be calendars that are not properly laid out. So let's say it's an app to book a flight ticket, and I need to select the date on which I have to travel. But if that has not been designed with accessibility in mind, and the date, month, year don't clearly appear in an accessible format, then I can't access that, and make the booking on my own. Another final example I will cite is PDF documents that are image based, right? So where the text is embedded in an image rather than being a searchable text based PDF. So given all of these challenges, the aim of our conversation today, it will really be to foster a well-considered debate on what it is that we can do to reverse this state of affairs that prevails in India. And to discuss this issue, we have with us two extremely competent and passionate advocates for the advocates who work on the cause of empowering the disabled. Lainey Feingold is a disability rights advocate. She's a lawyer, public speaker, and author. She is the author of the book that forms the subject matter of today's discussion, which is called Structured Negotiation, a Winning Alternative to Lawsuit, the second edition of which came out earlier this year, not earlier, actually, just a couple of months ago, I should say. Second is Shilpi Kapoor, who is the CEO of Barrier Break, which is a firm that works on accessibility in India. So she literally does this stuff day in and day out. That is the subject matter of our conversation, and therefore is particularly well qualified to speak to these issues. And she also runs a number of other platforms, like Newshook is one that I particularly like. So what we are going to do really is I'm going to ask Shilpi and Lainey some questions, and then they're going to respond to them, and we're going to try and have a conversation around them for about 40 minutes, and then we will leave the remaining 15 to 20 minutes for questions and answers from the audience. A few things that I should mention in particular, I mean, these should be standard fare in all events, but in particular, it's important to mention it given that this event is on accessibility. We do have sign language interpretation for this event. In our registration form, we gave users the option to put in any accessibility requests that they might have. We've ensured that all posters that were shared for this event had image descriptions with them, and we are also going to put out a transcript of the event once it's done. And then finally, I'm going to give a visual description, my own visual description, and my co-panelists will do so too, so that those of us like me who are visually challenged or blind know can sort of visualize how the people that they are listening to look like. So I'm sitting here on a sofa. There's a white wall behind me. I'm wearing a maroon colored shirt and and black pants. I'm a brown man with short hair, at least right now. Uh, and yeah, so that's it as far as I'm concerned. Lainey and Shilpi, would you just like to quickly introduce yourselves in terms of giving me a visual description before I ask you my first question?
Go ahead, Shilpi.
Hi everybody, I'm Shilpi Kapoor. I am an Indian woman with long hair wearing a cream color sari with some maroon beautiful motifs on it and a maroon blouse, and happy to be here. Over to you, Lainey.
Thank you. Thank you, Rahul. My name is Lainey Feingold, and I am a white woman in Berkeley, California at about 6:30 in the morning. I'm very glad to be with you all at the end of your day. My most salient visual feature is my gray hair, and I point that out because I have been working in digital accessibility with collaboration instead of lawsuits since 1995. So that's why I'm really happy to be in this discussion. Back to you, Rahul.
Thanks so much. So, Lainey, while I have read your book in great detail in preparation for this event, I realize that many of our listeners will not have had the opportunity to do so. So, for everyone's benefit, can you really start us off by describing what structured negotiation is as a concept, and then what stages are involved in it, in the process?
Excellent place to start. Structured negotiation at its core is a way to resolve legal disputes and to resolve conflicts and to advance issues without filing lawsuits, without conflict, without too much money, and as a way to preserve relationships. And it's how I've been working as a lawyer in the United States since 1995, when blind people first came to me and said there wasn't a single automated teller machine, ATM, that worked for blind people in not just the entire country, but in fact, the entire world. So we said to ourselves, well, we could do a lawsuit because, as you know, the United States system for solving claims is typically to file a lawsuit. But instead, we said, well, maybe we should try negotiating with the banks, because in fact, there were no ATMs that blind people could use. Blind people need ATMs to talk so they can have independent access to their money. And we wrote to these banks, 3 big banks, and honestly, much to my surprise, the bank said, sure, we'll sit down and negotiate with you. And that was the birth of structured negotiation right there at the intersection of technology, dispute resolution, and disability rights. So that started in 1995. And as the process developed, it became refined. And I would say now the stages are first deciding to collaborate, deciding to cooperate. Because when you file a lawsuit, the whole system's there. It has tools for you to use to fight about information, to fight about experts, to fight about this, that, or the other thing. With structured negotiation, first, the person with the claim is deciding, you know what, I want to be collaborative to resolve this. And if you don't have that mindset, which we'll talk about a little bit later, you really can't do it. You really can't do it. You have to go in saying, I want to make this work. And then there are the tools and the strategies that in fact have made it work for the past 25, 26 years. Engaging the person with whom you have the claim. When you file a lawsuit, you just file a lawsuit, court systems, court rules take over. Here in this process, there is a strategy of writing an engagement letter, starting a phone call, doing the first email that invites participation. So that would be stage one, engagement. Stage two is ground rules. Everybody has to be on the same page of what we're trying to accomplish. So many of the issues that Rahul mentioned in the intro are issues that the blind community and people with disabilities face in the United States. Mobile apps that don't work, finance that doesn't work, healthcare that isn't accessible. So in the ground rules, it gives parties a chance to establish the relationship that they're going to need to go ahead and resolve the claim. So having ground rules is a stage. Sharing information without battling.
Yeah.
Having experts. One of the real beautiful things about this process is that without court rules, the parties themselves, the stakeholders, can bring their expertise to the table. And very often, people with disabilities have the expertise to solve the problems. And because there hasn't been fighting, a negative press release, a lot of bad energy, the expertise of people with disabilities has really been the key to the success of this process in the last 25 years. We always work for a written settlement agreement. And I have a website, lflegal.com. There's a tab that says settlements, and you can read them. Transparency is an important value here. And then monitoring the settlements, make sure that they work. So those are the key stages. One last thing is the media strategy. I don't know so much about how it is in India, but in the US, typically when a lawsuit's filed, there's a press release saying how bad the person who's discriminated against has been. But if you want to negotiate with someone, starting with a punch in the stomach, either in the form of a bad press release or a legal complaint, isn't a way to engage, isn't really a way to engage. So we wait till the end. And you can also see on my website, I've done close to 100 press releases with very large companies on these kinds of issues where they can be proud of it, because the bottom line of digital accessibility that we're talking about, it is a legal requirement, but it's so much more than that. It's about inclusion, it's about innovation, it's about not leaving people out, it's about access to justice. So all these issues can come together in a process where, yes, it's to solve a legal complaint, but the law kind of takes a back seat to the relationships. Yeah.
Right. So Shilpi, why don't I ask you at this point, according to you, I understand that structured negotiation as a method hasn't been practiced in India, but in your everyday work, have you tried collaborating with service providers in in something similar to what Lainey is outlining, and how has your experience been of doing that?
So I think, Rahul, if when it comes to us working with service providers, we do that a lot, but sadly, very few of them are from India. Right?
Okay.
We do that for a large number of international, global organizations, but somewhere till now, the Indian ecosystem has, ignored the space of accessibility, which is why, you have the kind of challenges that you have today, right? So I've been working in this space since 2004.
Right.
in India and promoting laws and policies as the first step. Because if we don't have laws, policies, and guidelines, we aren't really going to make it anywhere. Because till then, there was not even a requirement. And I think we all know that it was only in 2016 that
Right.
the law really called out that digital access is required per se. Before that, we only had something that was voluntary in the guidelines
Right.
of government websites. So I think, it is now, and sadly, the pandemic has added 2 years or taken away 2 years from all of us being able to work on this problem at this point of time. So I think it is
Your
now.
voice is really coming through in a muffled way, Shilpi, now.
Okay. So is this better?
Yeah, now it's good.
Okay. So in reality, what we need to see is that we need to ensure that now the service providers understand that there is this requirement, right?
Yes.
We need to reach out to them, like Lainey said. We need to get different people on the same level, because what we've seen in the past is that
Hmm.
people come to the table to talk, but after that, it kind of gets diluted and it goes back to, okay, we will work on it and we will come back to you 2 years later, right?
And why does that happen, according to you?
Because, there is a gap of professionals who understand accessibility, right?
Uh-huh.
And there is also a gap in understanding the business case of why should we work on this, because beyond a point, companies are looking for the business case. And,
Mm-hmm.
it's like saying that people with disabilities are an invisible majority in India, right?
Yeah.
And so the first question we get asked whenever we speak to organizations in India is, we don't have disabled customers. And that's the first statement we yet get, or that the number is so small that we don't think it has a return on investment for us, right? So I think we have to shift it to show them how inclusive tech can benefit them, right? Because today you are seeing mainstream technology adopt accessibility, and
Right.
now we've got that opportunity to show. And I've always said this from an
You're
India.
again, your voice is coming from a distance.
Okay. So I've always said that from an India perspective, we
Yes.
need to, we got a lot of accessibility because of the West,
Yes.
not because of ourselves or, what our service providers are doing. So I
Right.
think it's now time to kind of
You
compare.
mean, by that, you mean, just to be clear, that companies or organizations that have units in India, just because their Western counterparts are accessible, their parent company is accessible, therefore it sort of percolates into India. So it's almost by happenstance that we get things in an accessible format rather than by conscious choice.
That's true. You hit it
Yeah,
on the nail.
yeah,
So now it's an opportunity to take Lainey's approach, to take
right.
people like you, and some others like Amar Jain and Kanchan, and for everybody to
And
come
to
together and create this kind of ecosystem where we build a healthy dialogue,
yes,
right? And that will take us to, which is why from the first time I've met Lainey, I've always said structured negotiations need to come to India. And I'm so happy we're
yes.
doing this session with her today.
Thanks,
Well,
thanks very. Yeah,
these,
sorry, Lenny.
well, I was going to say, these are all issues that you both mentioned, that Shilpi just mentioned. These are all issues that were faced by us when we started this
Right.
process.
Mm-hmm.
When we first worked on ATMs, and there were no talking ATMs anywhere in the country, we wanted an ATM in every location where blind people are. Well, initially the banks, they would do these fancy color charts showing no one is using these ATMs.
Right.
There's no use. And we would say, you know what, when sighted people first had exposure to ATMs, they didn't use them either. And
Yeah.
that's where blind people were. And what happened that really made the whole difference in the landscape of financial access in the US is that
Yeah.
a person at Bank America, who was our negotiator, he got to know the blind customers.
Right.
And, I quote him in my book. He says, they were people I wanted to hang out with. And
Right.
one of the problems we still have in the US, not as much as we used to, it's a problem around the world, is that people don't know disabled people.
Yes.
And this is a process that literally when the bankers could see that a blind person could not get $20 of their own money out of an ATM,
Yeah.
the bankers were like, we got to fix this. Or we worked on, and I still work on prescription labels
Right.
that talk.
Mm-hmm.
And the pharmacists, once they got to know a blind person without fear, just without anger, without fighting, just a straightforward stakeholder communication, these pharmacists were like, oh my God, we got to fix this, you
Yeah.
know? And that Bank of America guy, his name was Bill Raymond, he went to a national conference of bankers in the United States, and he actually invited me to go on the stage with him, but the banker conference didn't, and this was back in the late 90s, the bankers.
Somehow. Yeah. 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 Now
So
we're good.
he wanted
What's a
me to come
meeting
to this.
without one or two glitches here and there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He wanted me to come to that conference. They didn't want me to. So he got up on that stage and he said, you know what?
Yeah.
We have to stop fighting this. We have to
Yeah.
stop counting how many people are using it, because it is a civil right. It is a human right
Yes.
for people with disabilities to have access to the digital world. You cannot
Yeah.
be part of society in 2021 and not have access to the digital world. So
So
he
to
got up on
those
that
amongst
stage.
us who are hearing this, service providers, banks, people who provide online money transfer facilities, whatever service providers there might be, this is one take-home message that they should, I think, internalize, right? The fact that just because you don't have a lot of disabled customers now shouldn't be reason enough for you to not work on accessibility. And perhaps just to add, Lainey, to what you said, I guess this in itself should serve as a prompt for reflection. I mean, why is it that you do not have disabled customers? I mean, have you paused to consider that that in itself might be because you're not doing enough to create an accessible ecosystem for them, rather than using that as an excuse not to do better?
Also to Shilpi's point that conversations start, but then they kind of peter out and don't
Yeah.
go anywhere.
Uh-huh.
When we finished with the early banks, we didn't say it was structured negotiation because we didn't have a name. We had just done this thing that worked. And we said, oh, we should name it so maybe we can replicate it and maybe
Right.
we can do it again. And the reason that we called it structured negotiation is because too often in the US too happens what Shilpi described, is people want to bring people to a meeting or a gathering and it all feels good, but then there's no structure to move it forward to a
Right.
concrete resolution.
Right. And we'll hear more about that as we go forward. Thanks very much for pointing us in that direction about the importance of structure. Let me ask you this, Lainey, as my second question. So, as people with disabilities, when we encounter inaccessible apps or websites, there's likely to be a feeling of anger and outrage, to the effect that why should I, as a disabled person, have to jump through so many hoops to access something very basic, which others take for granted and don't really have to think about. So, according to you, how can that feeling be channeled in a positive direction?
That's a very good question. And I would never want to say to someone, you shouldn't be angry about being excluded from
Right.
digital world, because really when we talk about accessibility, another word is inclusion.
Right.
When things are accessible, people with disabilities are included. When they're not accessible, people are excluded. So certainly that's cause for anger. Structured negotiation is a process with a goal. And the goal is, as the parties have defined it, resolving the legal claim. So with that goal in mind, everything goes to that goal. So every conversation really is twofold. It's what are we going to accomplish in this meeting? Are we going to look at the code of the app right now? Are we going to find out about the testing? that's one part of the meeting, but also in every meeting, every conversation, every dialogue is, what attitude are we presenting this with? And in my experience, anger, once there's a formed relationship, I think it's okay to share anger or frustration, but anger isn't motivating for the people who we want to change from. When people are yelled at, when people are told they're discriminating, when people are told, that they've screwed up or done a bad job, they are not motivated to fix it. Their defenses come up, and they want to do the minimum, if anything. So I would say anger can be a true feeling that you can talk about with your friends over, a beer after the meeting, but in the relationship, I don't really find it that useful, because a lot of the issues we face here are not intentional by the service providers. They're issues that happen because people don't know, people haven't put the time to learn, people haven't made the connection between people with disabilities and the need for technology, not just as consumers, but as creators. People have a mindset of what it means to be disabled. And so within that mindset, in my idea, and in structure negotiation, the way we've used it for the past 26 years, listening carefully and dismantling those negative assumptions about disability.
And what is that mindset, Lainey, if I might ask you that generally? What are its main features?
Okay, one is not to make assumptions.
No, I'm saying, what is the mindset that people have? You're saying that people generally have a certain mindset towards the disabled, about having a disability. So what is that? I mean, I know it all too well as a person with a disability, but many people will not. So
I mean, what we call it, there's sort of the medical model of disability. A person is sick, they have a problem. Oh, poor them. There's pity. It's a lesser. It's not an equal. It's not your neighbor next door who you're going to be friends with. It's someone in a hospital somewhere that doesn't use technology. Well, I can tell you that the only reason I've been successful as a disability rights lawyer is because of the technology expertise of the blind people I've worked with. And, I mentioned the ATMs, but the other important part of that early conversation was at the end of talking about ATMs. So after like 3 years where we were in labs and the banks invited the blind customers to look at the layout and look at the code and look at what the talking ATMs are going to talk. At the end of that, one of our blind clients said, okay, good job on ATMs, but there's this new thing, online banking. And if we don't make that accessible, I had never even heard of online banking. I mean, no one was really, not very many people, there's some tiny percentage, I have in my book, I can't remember, we're using online banking. So that I learned from blind people. And this is a process that enables the service providers, the policymakers, the designers to learn from their customers who have disabilities, not just blind people, that's mostly who I've worked with, but in an environment that encourages collaboration.
Thank you.
It worked.
Yeah. Thanks so much for that. Now, my next question is to both of you, and feel free to answer, whoever wants to answer it first. In the run up to this event, I thought it would be constructive to reach out to a number of providers of apps and websites in India that are inaccessible in the sectors I laid out when we began this conversation, and to law firms, which are really the legal face of some of these businesses and therefore uniquely positioned to effectuate change. Because let us remember that accessibility is also a legal obligation, much as it makes sense as a business matter and it's a moral imperative. And we will get later on to talking about how those three reasons for accessibility sort of stack up against each other. But it is a legal obligation, right? Because until under the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, under Section 46, all service providers were to make their platforms accessible till June 2019. So, I mean, be that as it may, it's just good to have that information, not to say that, okay, look, you've not done what you were supposed to do, but just to say that it's not something that just being done in a voluntary way out of the goodness of someone's heart. So my question really to you is this: so service providers is one actor we reached out to, law firms is the other, the third is users with disabilities. People who face these barriers. So what message do you to have for each of these actors when inaccessibility comes up in their everyday lives?
Shilpi, you want
Okay.
to start us off?
I'll start it off. So I think for the service providers, listen, like Lainey said, accept that, okay, maybe you don't know, build awareness, learn about it and implement it step by
Right.
step so that you can make change happen, right? For lawyers, look at this as going beyond just a lawsuit, but building an equitable society and inclusion, so that you can also do, better things for society in general, and get some brownie points for yourself while you do it. I think Lainey talks very nicely about lawyers in her book, and how this is good for them also.
Yeah.
And the third is for people with disabilities. There are lots of people with disabilities out there. They come from multiple different types of disabilities and spectrums. Don't ignore them, and include all disability types and just not your own, so that we can really make things inclusive. Otherwise, just imagine if every disability group went to an organization separately and said, we're the blind, we want this, we're the deaf, we want this, we're the physically challenged, we want this. If every group will come and knock on their door, we're going to have a problem, especially in the case of digital, right? So I think it's important for us to come together collectively. So with that, Lainey, over to you.
So much there, so much there. One piece of this is India being on the global stage, both in terms of accessibility, digital inclusion, and also in terms of collaborative problem solving. And their digital accessibility is having a moment. There was a reference before, the leadership global companies like Microsoft, they are doing national advertising, like Raul said, about the accessibility features, because they know they're good for customers, they're good for the business case, they're good for employees. There's lots written and studied around how employees with disabilities benefit the organization. Employees with disabilities cannot be employed without accessible workplace tools. So there's a global movement here. And I've been in this for a long time, and there's some things that are happening, like in the US, there's a lot of sort of unethical lawyers in the space, but I like to put that in the back seat and say, wow, this is a global imperative. And honestly, a country like India, so big, such a leader in so many areas, kind of has to be part of this. It really has to be part of this, because the laws globally are getting stronger. The disability community is getting more organized and louder. And I think the principles of inclusion and not leaving people out are getting more accepted. And I think COVID contributed to that as the whole world moved online. So the importance of accessibility was more understood by people as everybody's online doing their work. So another thing Shilpi said, step by step, that is an important tool of structured negotiation. And in almost every case I worked on, we had the ability to say, okay, you're not sure you want to put an ATM all over the United States, put in 5 and see how it goes. You're not sure you want pedestrian signals that speak to make it safe for blind pedestrians. We want them everywhere. put in 5, literally. With the ATMs, we had a big press conference. As soon as we had 5 talking ATMs, now there's tens and tens of thousands. Same with the website, same with the mobile app. You know, pick one user journey, work with one disabled person and say, can a blind person sign on to their bank account? You know, like Rahul said, are the buttons labeled? And fix that, celebrate champions, celebrate the fix, go on to the next step. So structured negotiation allows that kind of flexibility, which I think makes it very well suited for disability digital inclusion, although it is a process that can be used in other contexts too.
Right. So let me then ask you, Lainey, according to you, how does your approach, how does structured negotiation differ based on the nature of the clients that you're working with? And in particular, I have 3 categories of clients in mind. One is, public sector versus private sector clients. And by clients, I mean the platform providers who need to make their services accessible. I don't mean disabled users. So public versus private sector providers is one. Second is those that are well resourced versus those that don't have the resources and just put their hands up and say, we just don't have the finances or the capacity to accommodate people with disabilities. So how does it differ? And then the third is those that are knowledgeable about disability issues and committed to the cause versus those that are either indifferent to it or positively against it.
Lainey, I'm just going to clarify. Public sector for you will be federal and government, and private sector would be private companies.
Yeah, thank
Right.
you for that.
Okay.
Yes.
First of all, we have used structured negotiation in both private companies and with public sector organizations like transit or cities, like I mentioned with the pedestrian signals. Part of this process is the intentionality of convincing people. So you basically mentioned 6 different things, private, public, rich, poor, get it, doesn't get it yet. So for all those, you have to be intentional about all the stages. Like, how do you engage someone who is public sector? How do you engage someone who's private sector? And
right.
all the different reasons need to be put on the table, because you don't know what's going to entice a particular person. When you're writing to even the biggest company, we've done agreements in the United States with Walmart, with Bank of America. There's a person on the other end reading the letter, a person, like all of us in this meeting, a person. And we don't know if that person is going to respond to the civil rights argument, the human rights argument. Are they going to respond to a legal argument? Are they going to respond to the business case? Are they going to respond to the idea that to benefit one person benefits all? Maybe they have a disabled child at home. We used to make a joke. We did an entire case with a healthcare provider. And in the very first day, he's telling me how his grandfather reads Braille. And it's so cool that we're asking for talking labels in an accessible website. And I used to say, oh, we need every lawyer to have a blind grandfather. So you don't really know what's going to appeal to whoever it is that you need the remediation from. So therefore, you have to practice equanimity and not make judgment and give it all you got, and put it all out there, because you don't really know what's gonna grab someone. I mean, in the United States, I've used structured negotiation instead of lawsuits. But I learned in writing the second edition of the book that some lawyers file the lawsuit, but then go to structured negotiation. So the lawsuit itself becomes less expensive and less confrontational. And in one of those cases, there was a press release. It was to improve jail conditions. And the sheriff of the jail did the press release with the lawyers for the disabled prisoners to say, we want to make our jail system better. Now, you wouldn't think that would happen. You'd think like a jailer, that the system for incarceration would be defensive. But when approached in this open, really, you know, there's some words that the legal profession doesn't really use, like kindness or open-hearted or friendliness. But to me, those things are all strategies. And especially around disability inclusion, they're strategies that have been very effective.
Right, right. I mean, I had a similar experience, you know, when I was clerking for a judge at the in India at the Supreme Court last year, and he manages the digital infrastructure of the court system in India. And because he had me as a person who's blind, he wanted to really use the opportunity, use the clerkship as an opportunity to effectuate some systemic changes to make the justice system more disabled friendly. And when we actually met with various high courts, the people who work there behind the scenes to set up their websites, to run them, to upload different kinds of documents, I was quite surprised to see how much receptivity and openness there was. I mean, I would have thought going in that they would raise all kinds of resource-based arguments or sort of just say that, oh, we have too much else to do. But actually, that was not the case. So, yeah.
And that's because you put a human face on it. It wasn't just a checklist. It wasn't just a legal requirement. It was about people. And structured negotiation is a legal process that allows focus on people. I mean, one little story in the process of structured negotiation, language really matters. Like I said, every communication, you be filtered through language. Well, I don't like to use the word plaintiff because I discovered that the word plaintiff has roots in the English language meaning wretched complainer.
Right.
And this is how the legal system is seen, that the person who brings the claim, oh, just a complainer. And here in the US, just somebody who wants money or, just some burden. But when you went and talked to the court system, they didn't see that. They didn't see a complainer. They saw a lawyer who needed accessibility to do the job, and they wanted to do it. And so the legal system, mediation, arbitration, lawsuits, structured negotiation, it should always do that. It should always bring the issues so people can really understand each other, but too often it doesn't, which is why I like working in this process.
Yeah. And sort of a reminder to the audience, if you do want to ask us any questions, as in ask Lainey or Shilpi any questions, please do feel free to put them in the chat box. We will start taking them very soon. So please do so. Then the next thing I wanted to ask, and maybe Shilpi, you can take this one, is how do we make businesses recognize the importance of adopting accessibility solutions that transcend boundaries, right? So, let's say Lainey works with a particular service provider in the US. I don't know. Like, let's say, we're talking about a particular laptop brand like Lenovo, let's say, or Apple, and they do something to make their product accessible, but that's only confined to the US. They don't. So as a user in India, I have to reinvent the wheel to again advocate with them and get them to make it accessible here. So how do we ensure that there is a meaningful cross-fertilization of ideas in these service providers and that they adopt strategies that are global in nature? Accessibility strategies. Yeah.
So Rahul, I think the first thing we have to do is to connect the dots for these organizations, right? So I'll give you an example of right when I started. This is one of the top 3 largest tech companies in the world, right?
Yeah.
And in 2005, when I reached out to them, they had no clue that they had accessibility in their product, or their Indian counterparts just knew the term accessibility, but didn't know how it was going to be used by people with disabilities. I actually had to connect them with their US counterparts and say, hey, do you know this person, right? And you have such amazing stuff in your product. And I remember when that organization came to TechShare, which was the first accessibility conference like CSUN, Lainey in India, that we organized at Barrier Break. We actually wrote PowerPoint deck for them because the Indian team did not have any clue. And we actually coached them through it. So sometimes it's about joining the dots. But I can tell you, Rahul, that from there to today, times have changed for all of us. We are seeing a lot of the same things come to India. So I think a perfect example is, the tool that we're using right now, Zoom, right? And Zoom globally is giving you live captioning, automated captioning that's available. We didn't have to ask for it from an India perspective, right?
Yeah.
So today we are getting a lot of this by default, but I think joining of the dots is the way to go. It's also important to make them realize that their own organizations are working in this space globally. So they might be a valuable 500 company, or their CEO might have signed a diversity and inclusion mandate, maybe with an organization like Disability In, which Lainey works with also. And if they've made that pledge, it's about just reminding them about the pledge, right? And just not, in an offensive way, like Lainey said, in a nice communicative way. Hey, it's so amazing to see the work that your team is doing. Oh, I saw this, information on your US website. We'd love to see this happen in India. Just make it fun, not make it legislative that, oh, you did this in the US, please do it in India also, otherwise we will put out a lawsuit on you. So I think we need to do those conversations more. And I think the one thing we do need to do, Rahul, is we need to be on the mainstream stage, right? We need to be in everyday tech conferences, right? Not in our
just disability specific ones. Yeah.
Right. So I think we need to change that. And I think we need to come together as a community.
Yeah. So at this point, we'll just take one quick question from Harshit Loya, which is whether when companies make investments in product accessibility products and services, whether that qualifies as CSR expenditure in India. CSR, Lainey, is corporate social. I mean, you would know this already, but it's corporate social responsibility. So under Indian company law, all companies are required now under the new law, as in not new anymore, but the 2013 law that we have, to expend a certain amount of their net profits for CSR activities, and the act lays down the list of activities that qualify as CSR. Do you have an answer to this, Shilpi?
Yes, I do.
Yes.
Sadly, it doesn't.
Okay.
So it does not qualify. If I am making my own product accessible, that's why we've been telling the government that we need some incentives for companies who are doing this. But at this point of time, you cannot use CSR budgets to make your own websites accessible or mobile apps accessible, right? So that is not an option today. And I don't think we should be using the CSR route because that's the charitable approach. I think we need to be promoting that this is tech for good. It is a business case. Otherwise, we will have one initiative in that space and not more than that. So I think we need to focus on mainstream business spend, whether it's marketing, technology, sadly compliance also as one of those heads, but look at it from there. So we wouldn't be able to use those budgets.
Yeah, I think on the
sorry. Yeah, Lainey, go ahead.
Yeah, the other sort of thing that ties in, I agree totally with Shilpi about connecting the dots. I find even in the US, in these big companies within the US, sometimes one side does not know about the accessibility initiative. So connecting the dots is huge. The message, I just want to bring up Procter Gamble, who is a company that has a person who runs their accessibility program named Samira Latif, and she's blind. And to me, she's a perfect example of using I never really asked her this, so Sam, if you're listening here, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but using the humanizing approach of the importance of these issues to make global change. And P&G is doing amazing things around audio description, which describes visual elements in advertising. They're doing tactile work on their consumer products because they know that it's going to benefit more than blind people. We have this idea that accessibility is essential for some, useful for all. And that's a message that the global corporations are showing us every day, more and more. You know, Microsoft, as we said, and Google and Procter and Gamble, and, you know, it's a mind shift. And I think that a dispute resolution process should contribute to the mind shift that's more inclusive, rather than send things up to the legal department. I am a lawyer. I know this is a lawyer organization, but too often in this space, lawyers can be a brake on innovation. And I think it's up to us as lawyers to see, wow, this is really good for our clients. This is good for business. This is good for the bottom line. And this is good for the values that we espouse.
So well
Right.
said, Lainey. So well said.
So Dhwani Mehta asks Lainey whether you think PILs in India can serve as a tool for structured negotiation. So PILs is basically, are you familiar with the concept, or would you like me to give you a quick lowdown?
Yeah, the quick lowdown would be good.
Yes. So that's PIL is short for public interest litigation, which is a tool that Indian courts developed in the 1980s and have refined it over a period of time, or made it worse depending on how you look at it. That is aimed at enabling people to espouse causes in the public interest. So, you know, any public spirited citizen can go to a higher court in India, and which is basically the Supreme Court and the high courts at the state level, and bring to their attention a social, public oriented, public interest cause that requires intervention, and then the court can really serve as a forum to resolve the issue. And there are a bunch of things the courts can do, such as, you know, getting the different actors to talk to each other, creating a facilitative environment for that to happen, and issuing orders from time to time, monitoring progress. So it's a very flexible it was supposed to be, at any rate, that sort of citizen oriented approach to resolve issues of governance. So do you see any parallels between the two?
You know, I would love to explore that more, because what I just heard is exactly what we do in structured negotiation. And, you know, the hardest part of this process, to be honest with you, is that first engagement. Can you get the service provider or the public organization, whatever, to engage? And once they engage, almost in 25 years, I've never really had a problem in resolving the claims. And let me just say, in the US, resolving the claims involves fixing the problem, as well as payment, in many cases, to the person with a disability, as well as payment to the lawyers. So when I speak to lawyers in the US, they're like, how do you ever get anybody to pay you? And what I say is, and this is, people are kind of incredulous about this, but all I can do is speak from experience, that when you have the relationship of trust that this process engenders, at the end of the day, legal fees are part of the system, and we've never had a problem but for once in getting paid them. So this process, as you've just described it, and I'm just hearing about it, gives people with the claims a way to start the engagement. So you could like skip over, like, oh my God, how am I going to convince this company that they should do this? Because you already have a process in this public interest litigation. And then from that point, the structured negation, like, we haven't talked too much about how we use experts. In the US, experts are very expensive. Each side has their own experts. The experts fight with each other. Here, we skip all that and we do joint experts. We can have an agreement to say, okay, the best expert in this field is this person. Let's bring them in to help us solve the problem. So experts become what they should be, which is a provider of expertise, instead of somebody that gets hired to do the fighting. As well as I said before, the experts who are the parties to the case, disability or not, often have great expertise. But in the US, we use the phrase public interest litigation to refer to private lawyers doing public interest cases. That is how I used to practice law before I got involved in this. So the topics are very similar.
Right.
But I'd love to explore that more with whoever asked the question. I'm very interested in that.
Sure. Ayushmita Samal asks about how able-bodied people effectively can serve as allies, as I understand it, to promote and espouse the causes of inclusion and accessibility for the disabled. And she's talking about sort of what you said, Lainey, on how it's important to have a human face to the cause, and how disability is often missing from the conversation, even when you're talking about inclusion and accessibility. So, how can an able bodied person meaningfully sort of advocate for the disabled in a way that isn't patronizing, or where you don't have a savior sort of complex, while you're doing it?
By asking the question, you asked a good question that has the answer built into it, really. That you come in respectful, you come in not knowing all the answers, you come in knowing that disabled people have the expertise, and again, using language like inclusion and human rights, and this is an what do they call it? Environmental, social, ESG. What is Shilpi? What are those letters for? All corporate America now. People want to do. I don't know. Sometimes I hear myself and I think, oh, I sound so Pollyanna-ish. But I truly believe when given a choice, people would rather do good than bad, and that is true for the largest companies. So our role as allies, as people with disabilities, as experts in the space like Shilpi is to make this issue of digital accessibility understood as core to including disabled people in society in the 21st century. So thank you for putting savior complex into the question, which shows that you are a person who is an ally. Because the idea that a person without a disability can somehow save or somehow knows what's best for disabled people, that doesn't fly, just like it wouldn't fly with any other minority group. So,
but it's also that people who are, non-disabled, like Lainey or me, we are allies to this community, right? We both work with people with disabilities. I employ them. So I think, we have to keep the bias out and assume that, the person will be empathetic, whether it's D&I professionals, HR professionals. Once they become aware, like Lainey's talked about earlier on, they just do become aware. So like I tell my people, we've just gone back to office. I say, come back into office so you can meet with each other. People are not personas any longer. People are not that, oh, there is this visually impaired person that we are testing for. But, here is Bhavesh, and Bhavesh has a visual impairment, or here is Rahul, and Rahul has a visual impairment. And thus, I've had lunch with him and I know these are his challenges. And now I'm putting that into my understanding of how he utilizes the web, because I've experienced him doing it. So I think we have to shift that. And the moment you change that conversation, like Lainey said, I don't think you get, the savior complex. You get people who are allies, like, Bank of America, the person that Lainey talked about. Yeah, but we have to be open even on our sides to allow them in.
Right. Not think that we alone have all the answers or are equipped to advocate for ourselves. Recognize that, just having a disability doesn't mean that
it has to be everybody
it's not
together.
A prerequisite necessarily to advocate. Yeah.
It has to be people together. I think that's the key.
Right. Harshit Loya is wondering whether data that's submitted to the Central Board of Direct Taxes as to like how many disabled taxpayers that are can probably strengthen the business case for diversity in terms of telling businesses, look, you have so many taxpayers with disabilities in India, all the more reason for you to make your platform more accessible. So, sort of, Lainey, let me ask you this, and also really broaden the conversation by asking about evidence. So when you interact with businesses, what kind of evidence do you put forward to them to make them take, as in you've said that you try to use a number of reasons, of course, to try and entice them, but what kind of evidence do you look for in support of those reasons?
That's a really good question. And having been a lawyer for 10 years in the traditional way before I got into this, I can tell you that I hardly ever have to use the word evidence in structured negotiation. So
Right.
I would say that that is a key part of the engagement. You know, how do we convince them? And the answer really is one word: story. Stories of people with disabilities using the product, using the service, telling the story of that person. You know, I did work with a blind woman on a financial trading platform, and she was an options trader, which is a very complicated thing to do, sighted or not. And she did it as a blind person using a screen reader and a braille display. So part of the letter in terms of evidence was her experience with the site and saying who she was. And I tell her story in the book. She has a very, you know, passionate story. Her family immigrated from China and they almost left her behind because she was blind, yet she came and she had a career in the US, and explaining how disabled people use tech. You know, there's a lot of great YouTube videos now that sometimes you can put a link in an opening letter. Oh, you may not be aware that blind people can use an iPhone, or pointing out to people that every mobile device, you know, iPhone and Android, has built-in accessibility features. And that is the beauty of accessible tech. You know, everybody has the technology in their pocket to be able to fully participate, if only we can get the service providers and the companies and the government to build things accessible. So, you know, just breaking it down into who the person is, why they need the access. Another thing that might surprise people, I know in the US it does, usually when you do a lawsuit, you start out by saying how bad the company is,
Right.
or the government. But here, we're usually working with large organizations, and usually you can find something that they're doing right.
Right.
So part of the evidence, this might sound counterintuitive, but part of the evidence is saying, hey, you do a great job with, say, customer service. Say if a blind person walks into your store, you greet them and offer to help with shopping. You praise a person for that. Literally, I feel like their mind expands to be more willing to hear what else they could be doing. You do a great job with customer service, but when it comes to your technology, you've left out this important component. So those are the kinds of things that we say to help engage, but without the story, without the person at the center, this process would not be as successful, if at all.
So it's almost like the conversation sandwich or compliment sandwich, as they call it, where you say one nice thing followed by one slightly negative thing and then one nice thing to top it all.
I hate to say it, it is kind of like being in a family. I mean, that's something how we say, like the way we communicate in our families, in our neighborhoods, in our spiritual environments, and in every other place, we know how we should behave when we want people to do something for us. But somehow in law, we kind of throw that all out the window in traditional litigation systems and think that fighting is going to get us where we need to go. So
Right.
that's part of this process. Yeah.
Right. So I do realize that we are slightly running over time, given that we're having such a robust conversation with questions from the audience, etc. Would the two of you be comfortable with continuing this for a little while and ending at 9:15 instead of 9 p.m. Indian time? So basically for Lainey, that would be 7:45 a.m.
I'm
That's
good if
fine
it's
with
okay with her. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay,
I already
great.
woke up early, so
So you might as well go on
it's
for a
all
while
good.
now that
It's
you're
all
here.
good.
Great, great. Thank you so much. So two questions which we can really take together and you can answer them in turn. One is on how, as someone who doesn't really have technical expertise as a disabled person, and if they come across an accessibility barrier, how do they inform a service provider, or an whoever, basically service provider about it? Like what is the manner in which they can learn to articulate their concerns in an effective way? And the second is sort of a more personal question for Shilpi and Lainey about your own journeys in terms of how, as able-bodied people, you came to occupy this space where you're advocating for the cause of the disabled. So why don't you take the first one first on disabled people learning how to articulate their needs precisely?
So I don't think they need to articulate their needs. Like Lainey said, they just need to say their story. I don't think they need to be technical. They just need to say, hey, I went on your website. I actually added, 2 dresses to the cart, but I could not submit my order, right? And the moment they speak like that, that's what people need to hear the story. But having said that, W3C has a great resource, which has been created by the Y team, which tells you on how you can reach out to organizations and identify that there are problems on their website and communicate to them. So that might be a good thing for people to look at. But I think just tell your story. And otherwise find a technical expert like, that and take them along with you. But initially, I think people just need to hear your story. So don't worry about the technicality, just talk about your challenge and get people to listen and then bring experts along with you rather than worrying about not being technical yourself. Lady, that's from me. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's all about story. When I talk to big organizations, corporations, I say, look through your customer feedback and you will find a lot of accessibility information not labeled as accessibility information. You will find people saying, I couldn't find this. I didn't know what to do. I got stuck here. I couldn't see this. Another piece is, training the customer service staff to understand that not everybody accesses technology the same way. So there was a good question I saw in the chat about how do we do that? How do we scale this issue? I mean, there's thousands and thousands of apps.
Yes.
How do you scale? And I think the strategy that we have been using, well, I'll tell a story, which is I was once at a conference and somebody raised their hand in the audience and said, well, we have to do everything accessible because we sell to Bank of America and they insist on it. So right there, I could see that our work with Bank of America had this trickle down effect to everything they are buying. So working with the large organizations first and having the large organizations understand that accessible procurement is really key to this inclusive ecosystem we're talking about, because most things are not wholly created out of cloth by an organization. They're buying things, especially workplace tools, stuff like that. In terms of the question, how I got involved with this, I will just say, and I always say this, especially
so just Lainey, if I could just press you a little on the scaling component of it. I guess the question is also that, like, as a disabled person, it's unrealistic to expect and we're facing this in the work that we're trying to do, where there are 40 plus apps that are inaccessible, right? So do we reach out to each of them, or is there some mass awareness exercises that we can conduct that would, like the kind of event that we're having, I suppose, is one step in that direction. So can you think of any other steps that one could take in that way before you answer the question about your own? Yeah,
I think I have to bring in a word here that I haven't said yet, but that has really been crucial to the success of this process in the US. And that word is patience. Yeah. It's very hard to have patience in the face of a massive gap in accessibility like you're facing. But in my experience, this kind of change that we're seeking requires patience, because accessibility is not one and done. You can get a company to label the buttons on the mobile app, and then they issue a release in a month and it's broken again. And I have seen that happen even with the most well-meaning companies. The way to make that not happen is to bake accessibility into the culture. And that takes time, which is why I suggest small steps and celebrations. And we have a day, a global day called Global Accessibility Awareness Day that, Shilpi's always involved with. And it's in May. So you have plenty of time to plan. That's a great day to kind of draw attention and, create a little competition amongst the companies. Like, what are you doing for Global Accessibility Awareness Day? And just have people get a feeling that this is going to make their company better, both with their own internal employees, with their customers. People like doing business with a company they feel is doing good. And I think many people are motivated by that, in addition to financial issues. So I don't think there's a quick fix to advocacy, just like there's not a quick fix to there's not a quick fix to advocacy, just like there's not a quick fix to accessibility. It takes intention, it takes deliberation, it takes strategies. And I don't think you can take 40 and just do one thing and make it fix them all.
Can I just add to that?
Yes, please.
Yes.
I started in 2004, going every month to the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment and sitting outside the secretary's room and trying to get them to listen to "We need accessibility in India." It took me till 2009 when the guideline of Indian government websites came out, and the first government website that we worked with them on for india.gov.in and made it accessible. It took us till 2016 with Javed to see that could come into the law. So like Lainey says, it takes patience. People ask me, why am I yet doing accessibility in India? Because I yet have hope, right? And sometimes I say that if I deliver accessibility in the West, it yet comes back to India, incidentally, because a lot of my companies do service India also. So, have patience, guys. I know it's tough. I know it's difficult, but keep at it. Keep telling your story. Keep sharing your concerns. Keep adding to, those notes that you send out. It will come. I guarantee you it will come. It is slow progress, but it will come. And patience, like Lainey said, I've had it since 2004, right? It's been 16 years, 17 years, and I'm yet patient, right? And I'm yet standing here with all of you. And I know all of you, some of you know me, for years, focusing on this. So just stay patient, keep at it, and we'll keep at it together, and we will make India accessible as we go along.
Yeah, I think I'm tempted to end on that note, given how how well it really captures really I mean, I was tempted to ask another question, but one final question, but I think that's really an excellent note on which to end really this wide-ranging conversation. So let me just thank both our speakers for sharing their reflections so thoughtfully, so generously, and giving us so much of their time. I know that it's given us, those of us who are actually working in the trenches on these issues, a lot of hope, practical guidance, and inspiration to really push forward and keep pushing. And I'm sure many have benefited from this, even though we may not yet realize it, and will continue to do so. So with that, let me thank you all for attending this conversation. Lainey's book, again, is called Structured Negotiation, a Winning Alternative to Lawsuits. Lainey, would you like to just tell our listeners and viewers where they might be able to get it in India in particular?
I made sure that the book is available digital and print, and it should be available digital. I know it's in Amazon India. It first came out in 2016. Second edition came out 2 months ago, and I self-published it on purpose. I self-published a second edition on purpose so that it would be 100% accessible. It looks better in the paperback than it did when the American Bar Association published it in 2016. And I was able to set the price at half of what the ABA published it at. So you should be able to find it online. I don't know, Shilpi, if you have any other.
It is on Bookshare. Somebody's just asked. It is on
Yes.
Bookshare, so
yes,
you
of
can
course, it's on
look for it there. And I just got it in from Amazon on a print edition. You do have to go through customs, but there's no custom duty. So do order your copy. It takes about 2 weeks to get to you, but well worth the read. I'm reading mine again and again.
Thank you, Shilpi. Yeah.
Yes.
All right, Raul, thank you so much. And thanks to the center for having me and hosting this conversation. It's been really a pleasure and honor.
Thank
Thanks
you,
so
Rahul.
much.
And thank you, Lainey.
Yes.
Thank you, Shilpi.
And I'm sorry to those whose questions we could not get to. I tried to navigate as many questions as I could with my own notes, Lainey and Shilpi, and another additional audio channel of having to navigate the questions and chat. But I do apologize for any questions we couldn't get to.
You know, I should say that I'm always happy to take questions. You can reach me through my email, through my website, lflegal.com.
Would you just like to share your email address in the chat box and also just spell it as in just articulate it, verbalize it?
Yes. Yeah, so my email address is lf, my initials, lf at lflegal. And maybe we can just close with one story, which is the reason my website is lflegal.com.
Yes.
Is because I was going to be laineyfeingold.com, but a blind friend told me that that name would not fit in one line of Braille on a business card. And he suggested do LF Legal because no one could spell Lainey, no one could spell Feingold, and it will, if you go with LF Legal, it'll fit in one line of Braille. And I share that because listening to disabled people has been the secret ingredient, not so secret, of the success of structured negotiation. So I'm glad I was able to share it with you, and I'll put the email in the chat. Feel free to reach out if you have any follow-up.
Lainey, give them your Twitter handle also. I think it'd be great for people to follow you.
Oh, yes. We didn't say that when you said, how do you become an ally? You know, the Twitter global accessibility community
It's fabulous.
Is fabulous. And you can find me under LF Legal, which is why I kind of have a brand, even though I didn't use a branding agency.
Yes.
Oh,
Thank
I
you
think
so
that
much.
just went to hosts and panelists. I don't think it went to everybody. Let's see. Sorry, let me just do that again to everyone.
Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Yes. Thanks a lot. Great. Twitter is LF Legal. All right. Thanks a lot. I have saved the chat and question and answers just in case you were not able to get through to any. We will be sure to reach out to you after the event to answer your questions. And with that, I'm going to close this meeting. Thanks very much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.